Prevalence of E. coli 0157H7 among individuals ages 1 through 88 within the United States 2018. Presented by Nee Cermak, Hannah De Silva, LD Martinez, Heidi Rodelio, Regine Rowland, and Kimberly Rosales.
Extent of the problem. Every year, at least 2,000 Americans are hospitalized and about 60 die because of E. coli 0157H7. The cost of care for E. coli infections is about $405 million. In the United States, E. coli contaminations has caused approximately 265,000 illnesses and about 100 deaths, which is approximately 40% of people dying. Agent of the disease. Escherichia coli, also known as E. coli, is a bacterium that is mostly found in either the gut of humans or in warm-blooded animals such as the meats like cows, pigs, and fish. These agents may be found in contaminated water, contact with human feces, and not washing one's hand, and cooking with unhygienic utensils. Describe the condition. E. coli is a bacterium that can affect anyone who is unprotected to this bacterium. This bacterium can infect anyone, since it is susceptible to travel from person to person, and it is easily transmittable when the infection subject hasn't washed their hands or utensils. As for the perceived symptoms, E. coli typically begins 3 to 4 days after contact to the bacterium. These symptoms with someone who is infected with E. coli may have diarrhea or bloody stool, abdominal pain, nausea, and vomiting.
The transmission of E. coli is spread through consuming the product that is contaminated by the agent. For example, there's the recent outbreak on romaine lettuce. So I will show you in this graph that California and Pennsylvania were known for having the highest outbreaks in 2018. Another more relevant example of transmission is when the E. coli outbreak happened at Chipotle, and they had to do a recall on all the food. Agents are a factor, sometimes a microorganism or chemical substance, whose presence causes negative health outcomes. This can also be in situations of an excessive presence or lack of therefore. The transmission of the bacteria is commonly found on warm-blooded animals through food not being washed, not cooked all the way, so when a person consumes the contaminated food, it then makes them very ill, to the point where they feel very sick for days. The World Health Organization states the incubation period can range from 3 to 8 days, with a median of 3 to 4 days. The mechanisms that many people can use to control the outbreak of E. coli that is affecting themselves and others are through simple preventions. If we looked at primary prevention, which is when the prevention of the disease is contained before it occurs, we can say that many people can take action by making sure that their hands are washed before dealing with or handling food. Next, when looking at the secondary prevention, the main aim of this is to be sure that the disease is reduced and has less of an impact. So, for this step, if a person has any symptoms of contracting this disease, then they can go to the doctors to confirm that they have E. coli. Lastly, the tertiary prevention is when a person tries to lessen the symptoms of their disease. For example, people can make sure that they have enough fluids in their body and eat foods that are washed and handled properly.
Regardless of age, gender, and sex, anybody is vulnerable to E. coli infection. E. coli bacteria can easily travel from person to person, especially when the infected adults and children don't wash their hands properly. This age group have a very high rate of incidence cases and more likely to be taken to medical care. Healthy adults usually recover from infection within a week, and also individuals with immunocompromise are susceptible to infection, but young children and older adults have a greater risk of developing a life-threatening form of kidney failure. Worst case scenario, some people may suffer from severe complications, and with these complications, they may have to be confined and could die. It is recommended that vulnerable population should avoid the consumptions of raw and undercooked meat products, raw milk, and products that are made from raw milk. Regular hand washing before preparation or consumptions and after toilet contact is highly recommended. As for environmental factors, the environment is one of the factors that contribute to exposure to E. coli. The places that are found associated with the infection are nursing home, school, children daycare, farms, and squatter areas. Also, outbreaks have also occurred among children visiting petting zoos and animals barns at country fairs. And according to the Department of Health and Human Services responsibilities, incidence measures the frequency of new cases. When a certain population experiences a new illness, injury, or chronic disease, the incidence rate helps epidemiologists assess the severity of the situation.
Temporal variation. Tracking temporal variation can lead to finding recurring trends as well as finding new incidents. E. coli outbreaks are most prevalent during warmer weather. They are most prevalent during this time because there are higher rates of agriculture. This means that more produce is being produced and there's a higher chance of contamination, and it can eventually lead to an outbreak. Tracking temporal variation along with tracking the location in which the most outbreaks occur is very important. E. coli is common in rural areas. For example, is very common in the rural areas of Washington, specifically during summer. Knowing where it is common can be used as a preventative factor. For example, Washington can get more testing done on the produce that is ready to sell before it's actually sold. By doing this, it can prevent large outbreaks and recalls since it would be known where the E. coli is coming from, and it would minimize the amount of people being affected and becoming ill. Gaps in knowledge. Most outbreaks are known to come from leafy greens and vegetables. However, it is still not really known if livestock and other animals that are being used for consumption are being infected with E. coli. There is a possibility that they are infected with E. coli and there's not enough research being done. The focus is on leafy greens and vegetables, but there should also be a focus on livestock. This can be used as a prevention on possible outbreaks due to E. coli infecting livestock. There is also gaps in knowledge in molecular typing of isolates. By closing this gap, there will be more ways of finding out exactly where the outbreak started, why it started, and how to prevent it.
Further epidemiological research. There are many different methods and practices that should be researched and improved to reduce the incidence and prevalence of E. coli. Some methods include slaughterhouse and farming processes, school food preparation and transport services, epidemiological tracking and recording, researching the bacterial strain thoroughly, and equal knowledge, skills, and access to equipment. The slaughterhouse and farming process. Epidemiologists need to research and improve sanitation policies, food and safety inspection services, regulations and jurisdictions, and food monitoring before packaging and consumer safety. School food preparation and transportation. Food preparation should be carefully examined to reduce the rates of E. coli in schools. Meats, raw vegetables, and dairy products should be handled properly. Epidemiological researching, surveillance, monitoring, and promotion. Researchers should report all newfound information to epidemiologists. Epidemiologists should work with health promoters to educate the public about primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention methods against E. coli. Knowledge of the strain can help terminate its existence, and many outbreaks go unrecorded and have unknown etiology. Epidemiologists should work on spread of equal knowledge, equipment, and better skills to detect this strain of E. coli. Why do we deserve the $100 million? We have a mission and goals to reach. We want to change the effects, prevalence, and incidence rates of E. coli on a world scale. It is very important to place surveillance on all possible determinants, and we want to prevent distribution to populations across the world. Testing equipment and records should be distributed to all health centers around the world. We would also like to propose and teach exemplary sanitary skills to slaughterhouses, ranches, and farms in the United States. By January 2030, our organization is planning to work with the USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Services to improve the zero tolerance policy for E. coli across nations. The USDA has already invested more than $70 million toward food safety research and education to improve our farming to fork programs inside of the United States. It is essential that our organization can take effective programs from the United States and implement them in schools and all other areas where produce is shared.
Graphing data can be beneficial for public health officials when analyzing epidemics. This figure from a 1997 study shows a monthly prevalence of E. coli in 14 cattle herds during one full calendar year. Each numbered month corresponds to each month of the year in relative order. For example, month 1 is equivalent to January, and month 7 is equivalent to July. By looking at this figure, one can conclude that E. coli prevalence peaks in the warmer summer months. There are two obvious peaks, one in May and the other in July. In this particular study, the cattle are considered hosts. And just as a reminder, hosts can be any person or any other living organism that naturally carries an infectious agent. When observing trends by season, this figure from the CDC shows the frequency of infected individuals by the date of illness during warmer months. For this particular case, the graph includes data from March to June in 2018. This outbreak stemmed from romaine lettuce grown in Yuma, Arizona. The incidents occurred for a longer period of time and with a higher frequency compared to the outbreak in the next figure. In this graph, the E. coli outbreak was caused by a different source. The outbreak was traced back to leafy greens harvested in Santa Barbara, California. When taking a closer look at this figure, one can see that the frequency and duration of the outbreak was less severe than the previous graph. This is due to colder weather patterns. It should be noted that this graph contains the latest reported data available, so it does not include the last month of 2018. This is indicated by the gray section. Surveillance and mapping also helps public health officials monitor disease outbreaks. This line graph indicates a steady trend of E. coli outbreaks through an entire decade, from 1996 to 2015. When interventions are effective in helping to control outbreaks, it can be observed in a timeline graph, such as this one. For our strain of E. coli, it's indicated by the gray line. One can see in this graph that there was a large outbreak between 1999 and 2000, but that incidence rates began to decline afterwards. This suggests an effective intervention occurred. On the other hand, mapping outbreaks allows public health officials to determine areas affected by an epidemic and potentially serve as a means to locate the source of the problem. This map shows the distribution of reported E. coli cases by states. In this instance, California and Pennsylvania are more heavily affected by the E. coli outbreak than other states. Using this information, epidemiologists can narrow down their search for the E. coli source. The timeline for reporting cases of E. coli is approximately 2 to 3 weeks. This infographic shows the amount of time it takes from the very beginning when a person is exposed to E. coli to the very end of the timeline when the case is reported as part of an outbreak. In between those events, the person will become ill, they'll see a physician who will request a stool sample, a lab will then identify the agent of disease, and public health labs will determine which strain of E. coli is the culprit. The timeline of actual events varies from person to person, but ultimately the outbreak will go through this process. Thank you for watching and listening. This concludes our presentation on E. coli. The following slides contain our references.